All right. Well, near as I can tell, it's a Monday. At least that's what my calendar is implying. So I'm going to trust that my calendar is correct. So good evening, Daniel. Thanks for joining me here on Between Chair and Keyboard. Appreciate it. Thank you so much. And
Hi,
I
Nate.
know it's late for you. Well, I mean, not late, but we did bump this up to make it not quite as painful since you're coming to us here from the. So where in France are you located?
The suburbs of Paris, like almost Paris. I can get to Paris by the metro
Okay.
or riding my bike.
Oh, nice. That's the way to do it. I would not want to drive in Paris. I've never
No,
figured
you
out how
wouldn't.
people do that.
And like the more like the every year it gets harder to drive, right? They remove roads for or like lanes and put bike lanes instead, and then
Oh,
and they brought down the speed limit by
okay.
almost half last year, I think.
Wow.
So great when you bike, probably not so great when you drive, but I don't know.
See, I'm convinced there's a handful of cities that if you did not grow up driving in that city, you have no business driving in that city. I would put New York in that category,
Oh yeah.
Boston, frankly, London, Paris. I mean, there's a handful of places where it's like would never even dream of attempting to
Oh
drive there.
yeah. There's this huge, so you maybe you know the arc of the Arc de Triomphe,
Yeah, oh
and it
yeah, yeah.
has a huge roundabout around it, probably 5, 6 lanes or something like that.
It's insane.
And when we would go around in the car with my mom, like arriving there, she would just like pause and tell me, "Don't talk, don't talk anymore," until we're out, and then go
Right.
around it, and then a sigh of relief once we're out.
Yeah, I would do everything in my power to avoid that particular intersection. There's just no twigs. I mean, I've been in Ubers and cabs and whatnot navigating through that, and I do not understand the rules. It just seems to be you just sort of kind of go, and people just
Right,
kind of
right.
like adjust.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a
Yeah,
cultural understanding.
it absolutely is. There is a general lack of markings, as I recall, too, on the streets. It's been since the
Yes,
before the
cobblestone,
pandemic.
unmarked. Yeah.
Right. Just like, what am I supposed to do here? And I've tried to decipher the rules, and I'm like, yeah, no, clearly you just have to live here and drive here every day before you know what's going on. So
Yeah.
it's a mystery. It's a mystery.
I don't take it with my bike. I go around. I would never
Oh
try that.
no, no, no. That sounds like a recipe for a trip to the hospital,
Yes,
frankly. It seems like
possibly.
you would lose that battle. But well, Daniel, thank you again for joining us. Why don't you just give us a little bit of your background? How did you get to this weird space we know as technology? Oh, and I will say good afternoon. Well, good morning, actually, Sean, since you and I think are pretty much in the same time zone. So
Hi,
good
Sean.
afternoon, sir. Thank you for joining us. So again, how did you get to into this technology space?
That's a great question. I think I've always been fascinated by computers, machines, and stuff like that. I remember probably around 15, something like that. I bought
Okay.
one of these like huge books, PHP, MySQL, PHP 4, MySQL, and HTML, and like read it cover to cover, and then
Oh my
started
gosh.
implementing the examples like on Notepad. And then my
No.
my my parents' hosting provider, they had an FTP server, and you could drop your PHP files, and there was a MySQL database that I don't know how you got the credentials for those.
Okay.
And then I did my first stuff like that. I wrote like as every teenager around that age would do, something that you can like post articles and like write comments, more or less of a
Hmm.
blog type of thing. Never actually added any content. I'm not the content guy. I build the thing
No.
and then
Oh,
give it
exactly,
to someone
exactly.
else.
That's implementation detail for someone else. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. And so always lots of fun with that. And at uni, I decided not to do computer science, or like not to
Okay.
focus on that, not to major on that, because I was afraid that I would get bored doing it too much. And
Interesting.
then I actually got bored of the other stuff and then came back to, to software engineering after maybe a year of work. I was like, I can't.
Yeah, that ain't
No,
me. Not it.
PowerPoint, nah, not for me. Like, all right. And so back to software engineering, and brought me, where I'm at today.
Oh,
It's
that's
been
fantastic.
how long? Like 12 years now. Not bad.
Uh, One of my students we were chatting. So my class just started last week. My graduate students are back in session, and I was chatting with one of my students afterwards, and he made this comment about how he was kind of the the gray beard of the cohort because, he's been doing software for like 17, 18 years. And I didn't have I don't know. I didn't want to admit how old I was by then saying, well, 17 years. Okay. I've been doing this for a little longer than that, but yeah, we'll just call it that. So
17 years, you're probably like the ninth percentile, like older, like we double every 5 years or something, or
I think that's right. I mean, I heard some stat about how many people come out every year in computer science or just to get into technology every year,
right.
and the numbers continue to go up. So yeah, you're not wrong. I'm sure even once you get past 5 or 10 years, it's probably a fairly, you get closer to the top of the proverbial pyramid. But let's see. Oh wait, yeah. Well, Sean, I mean, I wouldn't say we're old. I would say we're experienced. Maybe that's where. Are we? Does that mean we're like heritage developers or something? I wouldn't want to say legacy developers. I think that's probably not the right connotation, but
no, we bring back, we're entitled to say remember X, remember
Yes.
XML, remember
Yes.
Corba, remember, I don't know, which language did you start on?
I started with C++. That's
Right.
where I cut my teeth and moved from there into mostly Java. But yeah, I'm old enough to have done C++, and I
For
won't even
Java.
mention the other language that starts with a C that I have a very, very short experience with because I don't want anybody to think that I'm going to program that again. So Sean says he walks around his office looking like Gandalf with a staff and an experience period. Nice. I'd like to actually see a photo of that, Sean. I think that would be worth posting here on the socials. So how did you then sort of like Micah? What did that early career look like? How did you get involved? Because I mean, you and I are colleagues here in the same organization. When did you come to Pivotal? How did that? You've got the Pivotal shirt on today. I'm glad I didn't wear that one. I just wore the Make Jar Not War
I
T-shirt.
love it.
So
Beautiful, beautiful shirt. Other
well played.
colleagues would
Well
say.
played. Exactly.
Pivotal. I joined Pivotal Labs when we were opening an office in Paris here.
I've been to that office.
Right. It was not bad, wasn't it?
It was nice.
So they were opening the thing here, and I was looking to change jobs and get out of services because I wanted to get into product. And then I interviewed for labs a little bit by accident, found the ad on Hacker News. There was this guy, Jacques Chester. He would post every month on Hacker News in the Who is Hiring thread. And for me, it was very easy to parse that thread because I could just do Control F or Command F and look for France, and there would be 3 ads out of 800.
Oh, geez.
And Pivotal was one of them. And so I interviewed, and it was a lot of fun. The interviewing process, it was very, very different from the rest, right? No whiteboard. You're doing coding. You're pairing with someone. Since we're opening the office, we didn't have the office. So before sending me to London to do the real interview, I did a remote interview with someone in Berlin, I think. And we paired on Swift on iOS development on a real customer code base. I had never done Swift or iOS before, and we just interviewed on it and it went well. And so that's where I started my journey here. And then a few years at labs, which was a ton of fun. And when the pandemic hit, was more or less when my first child was born. And so it was a good time to change the pace a little bit, a little bit less pairing, a little bit more flexible hours, and I moved internally. I do a little bit of Tanzu now, and I do a little bit of Spring in the Spring org.
Sure. Oh, that's crazy. I've thought a lot about interviewing, and I feel like the way at least some organizations do it is I would say flawed. I had one of my grad students go through the FANG process, and I don't remember which one, and it doesn't even matter. And just listening to him, a practicing engineer with a decade of experience, halfway through a master's degree, and to hear him just sort of, I spent 3 months memorizing and preparing, and I just thought, what does that actually show you? Like, I don't know about you, but I've never once written bubble sort on a whiteboard on an actual production project. So I don't really understand the value of that as an interviewing technique, other than it's a sieve, right? That and
Right.
I suppose
Yeah.
if you've
Yeah.
got thousands and thousands of people applying for every position, you need something to
Right.
sort of whittle that pile down. But I don't feel like it does a great job of identifying somebody who actually knows what they're doing. I think that pairing experience, especially when you don't really know the language all that well, is going to expose, well, how do you think and how do you approach this and what do you do when you're like, I don't know how this works in Java, Spring,
Right.
C
Right.
Sharp, whatever.
Yeah. I guess the big process like this like filters for a personality type, like someone who can
Yeah,
cram and cram and cram and get through
yeah,
it. So you get a very homogeneous population at the end.
hmm,
Yeah, the pairing bit is interesting as well because we would pair all day at labs. And
yeah,
so doing pairing and doing real pairing on a real project, a real piece of code, if possible, not a canned interview, um,
hmm,
it gives you the experience of that, right? It like,
right,
and as an interviewee, maybe you don't like it. Maybe pairing's not your
yeah,
thing, like pairing all day.
yeah,
So it's a great showcase, like, do I like this or not? But
hmm.
like how they would like show their mastery of the IDE, I was just wow, starry-eyed. I'm like, I have to learn this. I have to go to this place.
Teach me.
Yeah.
That's a great point because we talk a lot in interviews about culture fit, and it goes both ways. And I do think that that's a huge part of it is giving someone that opportunity. It's like, is this a good fit for you? And for some folks, pairing is awesome, and for other folks, it is absolutely exhausting, and it just doesn't click, and that's fine. I don't think there's anything right or wrong. I think it's just a comfort level. So I think that's a great point that not only does it allow the interviewer to get a better sense of how you approach problems and think and tinker, but it also gives the interviewee a chance to go, whoa, this is not going to work for me, or this is amazing.
Yeah,
When
yeah,
can I
yeah,
start?
yeah. Yeah, and you see the real thing, right? You don't
Yeah,
see the. Of course, there's a little of process, and some of it is stage, right?
sure.
You're putting on a little bit of a show, and you're following some rules to try and be as objective or as not subjective as possible in the process,
Hmm.
but you're closer to real work,
Right.
and so it's much more pleasant of an experience because like there's no hidden. Like, it will look like what you'll be doing in your day to day,
Right.
and that's great.
Right. So speaking of pairing, I know that's somewhat controversial in IT, at least it has been throughout my career. And there seem to be some people who love it, some people who hate it. I certainly know a lot of the FUD, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt around it typically comes from people who've never done it, have never experienced it, have never tried it. What are your reflections on pairing? Did you enjoy it? Would you do it again? Do you think it's actually better, et cetera, et cetera? And I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are, having actually done it for more than a few minutes.
Oh yeah. Oh wow. It was labs that was 9 to 6, 5 days a
Hmm.
week with like 3 1-hour meetings. So more than
Sure.
30 hours of pairing throughout the week.
Wow.
Um, so first, it's exhausting. It is
Yeah.
absolutely exhausting. I have never worked as hard as when I was pairing. Like, there's no way to check your Facebook when you're pairing,
Right. Right.
especially when you're like having a rule of like no devices, no phone, and so on. So it is very exhausting. It is a major, major ramp up in your career. Like, there's
Hmm.
no way to learn as fast as with pairing. It's just
Yeah.
it's amazing, right? And that was a part of the value proposition of labs, right? We would say, pair with us, you'll learn, and then you go back to
Hmm.
your own offices and then you do your thing. It takes a while to get used to it. And
Yeah.
so, if you just try it for the day or try it for a week, you might not have a good understanding of what the benefits it can bring and like what the costs are. Um, so, I would encourage people to experiment for a longer time until, they settle in the rhythm of pairing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Pairing full time is a lot. It, and now that I have a kid, that I have, school pickups and school drop offs, and sometimes
Right.
my kid is sick
It's a
and
lot
so on,
harder.
it's harder, right? And then I see how, it can be not very inclusive if you have
Hmm.
different needs, then like I can be here at 9 until 6 every day and so on. Um, so you learn a lot. You don't get stuck as much as when you're doing it, coding on your own, and you get into
Right.
this like, blank page syndrome, and you're stuck on the problem and you don't really know where to
Yeah.
start. You don't usually do that when there's two of you. You just try something because
You just start.
it's awkward. Yeah. So it's a
Well,
great
but it's
motivation.
not as scary,
Exactly.
I mean,
Well,
because
yeah,
I
right.
I absolutely have had that experience multiple times in my career. You're staring at a blank editor. There's nothing as intimidating as, what do I do now? How do I start solving this problem? I have to build
Right.
something from scratch. It's easier when it's a bug or adding a feature
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
exists. You're like, oh, okay, I go into this class and I go and I
Yeah.
modify this
Yeah. Yeah.
function. Now it's like, what do I call it? And what does this hold? Does this go on something else? Is this what? Oh man, and that you can get into that beach ball phase real easy there.
Yeah. 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 Definitely. It's now that I we pair much less often. Our team is distributed. My closest colleague is in Berlin, and then the rest of the team is in the U.S. All the way from New York to Portland. So it's
Wow, that's a lot of time zones.
it is so less time for pairing, and so I get more me time to maybe go deeper on a specific topic and like
Sure,
experiment with the toy with the object a little bit more than I would in a pairing dynamic, because we would be
sure.
more focused on like solving the problem and like moving forward. And I have a little bit more time now to like not solve the problem but like build the context around it, for example,
Hmm.
and throw it away and it's fine. Which probably you can do with pairing, but you have incentives not to do this.
Right.
So I'm kind of I'm grateful for that as well, for having experienced both.
Sure, sure. Well, and I think the older I get, the more convinced I am that dogmatism is dangerous anywhere. And the idea that there is one and only one way to do something is flawed inherently. There's a lot of different ways to get to the result. I certainly, some of the biggest mistakes I've made is where I get fixated on, but this is how I have to do it, and then usually it's my wife who says, "Well, wait, what's your actual requirement? So could you just do this?" And it's like, oh yeah, that'd be way simpler. Let's just do that. And so I think it's good for folks to realize that there are different approaches, and there may be times in your life and your career where pairing is outstanding, and there may be other times where it doesn't fit as well. I mean, I certainly would be challenged with that. I've got a teenager, and every time I turn around, it seems like there's something going on. And so it would be challenging for me to adhere to a rigid 9 to 6 kind of calendar for sure. But then other people love it because it's like, nope, my day is 9 to 6 and that's it. I don't have to think
Right.
about anything other than that. So, it's
Structured.
all trade-offs. Yeah. Yeah. The structure has some pros and cons, like so many things in software, right? So how did you find adjusting to open source? Because, I've spent the bulk of my career writing enterprise software for a customer, typically internal, and then you think about open source, where it's a very different set of rules and incentives. How was that transition?
It was very interesting because I had started open source before as a user, right? Most of the
Hmm.
things we use, at least half of it is open source.
Right.
Um, or the libraries we use to build our projects and the tools we use in our in our build tool chain and so on. And I started open source out of necessity
Yeah.
when we found something that didn't work and it wasn't really well documented, and so you could just go to GitHub and see the code and see, oh, like this special case, like when this library doesn't handle the connection doing a reset, but our product
Right.
does connection resets for reasons, and oh, I could contribute to this.
Yeah.
And it started with this, and I think my first open source PR was like, I don't know, like 3 lines of the code in this one library, plus the
Yeah.
tests, and it took me 6 months to get it merged. I think it started
Wow.
in September, and then it got merged in
6 months.
February. Yeah, like
Wow.
the project had like very high. It was a small thing, but they had
Right.
very high standards. And I was touching, things on the perimeter that weren't like
Sure.
really fully tested. And so, there was a lot of rework of like, oh, but we want, as I was touching this, they wanted tests to be added around it. And so,
Oh,
there
sure.
was always something that needed to be changed, always something, something, something. And then, after a while, you get it merged. And so after that, it's much easier once you have
Yeah.
the 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 culture of
Yes.
that one project, right? What is expected, which is not, most of the time it's not written. Like, you could
No,
have a
no.
code of conduct, you could have a contributing guide, but it doesn't. The contributing guide is very high level. It tells you, oh,
Yeah.
we want you to write tests, we want you to sign this, we want you to respect this and that, and open an issue, do the discussion before doing merging the code and so on. But it doesn't tell you like what people value, like what individual
Yes.
maintainers who are like specialized in this area of the code, what they value in their tests or what they value in their APIs. And so
Hmm.
you kind of have to build that 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 foundational context around, oh, what are we trying to achieve here. And it's much easier to get into smaller projects, like in
Sure.
tools. If you're using tooling, I at labs we use this thing called git duet to like
Yeah.
do double name commits. And I can't remember what the thing was, but like there was a thing around the sign off message that it adds at the end in special cases. And like, oh, git duet, it's small, we can contribute to that.
Sure.
And so this is a good entry point. And then coming to Spring, it's a whole different ballgame, right? Because it's
Yeah.
not, well, git duet is well used, but it's not used as much as Spring, right?
Oh, right. Right.
And it's a finished tool, right? The API is how you use the tool. It's not what you build with it. People don't usually build
Hmm.
on top of it. And so in a big ecosystem like Spring, with many users who have, their use cases built on top of that, and they may even have libraries built on top of the core
Right.
libraries. You can't change everything on a whim like this. And
Yeah.
then projects are big, right? Spring
Yeah.
Framework is huge. I contribute to security. Spring Security is a massive library, and so there's again this thread of thinking of like how
Hmm.
is it built, and then what's the direction? Where do they want to go in the future? What if what I'm doing, is it aligned with where we want to go, which is just a general direction, because there's this interaction with the community. And like, well, you have a plan, but then you put it to the test and then
Right.
realize that people maybe don't agree with that plan. And like
Yeah.
many people did not agree with that plan. And so it's a little bit more, it requires more adjustment and more time for thinking, right?
Yeah.
You think things through, and the pace is much slower, because you want to get it um, as right as possible, um,
Yeah.
eh, on the first try. And so you go slowly, bit by bit, and then you release those bits, and you see how they match or how they don't match. Spring Security, when they changed to 6, they had breaking changes as well. And
Right.
so, but for testing those, they started introducing the new behaviors in 5.6, 5.7, and then 5.8 was a transition release that you could like simulate what 6 would look like. And so they had a lot of time
Hmm.
to test their IDs out, and go slowly again.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's a great point, that a lot of what happens in software, especially open source, is not documentable even in some ways, right? I mean, we joke about looks good to me, but how do we get to that point? And it is a very subjective thing in most cases, and it's I'll know it when I see it, and the only way I can communicate it to you is by we go back and forth for 6 months, and then we get to the right spot. But I think the other point that I think of with something especially like Spring that's so foundational, there's a huge mandate not to break it, right?
Yes.
Because you've got how many thousands upon thousands of applications that rely on it. This is the same thing I've talked to Brian Getz about in terms of Java. The overriding mandate there is don't break Java, because you've
Yes.
got what, billions of lines of Java code in the universe. And we sit here, and I remember when lambdas were being kicked around, and Brian made this point at one point saying, hey, listen, yeah, we understand the concept of putting lambdas in is not hard. Okay. It was in the original plan for Oak. So just cool off. But the hard part is how it interacts with every other existing feature and everything else that's been bolted on. And what happens when you mix that in with, generics, and you mix that in with serializable and et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, that's where the hard part is. And especially too with something like Spring that has grown exponentially, where, this might seem trivial in this context, but it interacts with these other 9 things in ways that you may not know if you don't have some of that background. That's the hard part in my experience.
Yeah, definitely. And so how do you get to innovate in that context?
Right.
Is a very difficult question, because it's easy. People don't want you to change anything. Ideally, right? It works and it doesn't change.
But make it better. Make it
right.
better.
But
don't change anything. No, don't change that. That's my favorite thing.
So what are the things that you're allowed to change, or what are the feathers you're allowed to ruffle to
Right.
to move forward and choose that wisely? And the Spring team is amazing at that. I saw you chatted with Sebastien a few months back. He's a visionary in that, right? It's like introduced Kotlin, introduced native, like, yeah, they have an experience of like looking far into the future and then drafting a plan to get there and then making that happen.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's one of those challenges we face in this space, right? And one of the things that I've noticed with experience, is you start to see how these patterns repeat, and you start to see how this thing that's quote unquote new, we did this 10 years ago. We just called it something different. And you start to be able to figure out where the trends are going and say, okay, yeah, no, this is going to be a big deal. Let's start heading in that direction. And certainly I've been in some big companies where you get that we take a long time to turn the ship. It's like, of course, we need to start turning now, though. We can't just wait a year. We see this talking to clients about upgrading to Spring Boot. It's like, yeah, it's coming, right? So you can keep trying to kick the can down the street, but eventually you're going to have to bite the bullet and rip the Band-Aid off,
Right.
and we try to give them some arguments in favor of that. We try to give them some strategies, but sometimes it's hard to get people out of that mindset of, well, but it works, Nate. I don't want to touch it. Like,
right.
Yeah.
Especially now.
Thinking about
you have to, right? Like the security theme is big. Dependencies have to be updated now. It's
right.
a mandate, right? And so we're not going to be supporting Spring Boot 1.5 10 years.
Sorry.
And so you have to do something, and you have to get the ball rolling, and then build that into your you're building security in your build pipelines and processes, but now you have to build updates in how you do products, right? You can't just like put them in a box and forget about them. You have to have something that tomorrow I must be able to upgrade a version if a CV comes out, and so I better keep it in shape.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think a lot of that boils down to the fact that you can't see these things in software in the same way you can in the physical world. In the physical world, we understand that we need to fill these potholes because I just ran over it and I popped a tire and that's irritating. So come on, city, go fill this pothole. It's other than us, other than the software engineers, it's really hard to see the potholes in code. And so if you're a business customer, you don't always appreciate that, hey, we're holding this thing together with literal bubble gum and baling twine here. And we need to make some changes here. We need to invest in that maintenance, and some of that's on us to communicate it in a way that's effective, that resonates with those decision makers, but I'm hopeful too, as we get a more sort of technically literate populace, that people will appreciate, hey, your phone that updated last night while you were asleep, like we need to do that too. And here's why, and I think security is an excellent wedge into that. And several of the clients I've had conversations with this spring and summer have been, oh yeah, we basically just talk about it from a security standpoint.
Right. Now it's you have to do it. But as professionals, we also have to build that into our practices, because I've been working in services for a long time before moving internally in R&D, and often you build the thing and then you let it run forever, or like
Hmm.
you would log, a customer would come. So at a company I worked at, I had not worked on that project. They built basically the control tools for controlling a factory that makes cables, but like power cables,
Oh,
big
wow.
cables. And so it has like moving bridges and
Yeah.
cranes and everything. And the software had not evolved in 10 years, and they called us because they had removed one of the storing areas where they would put the cables that were manufactured. And so it had to
We
be
need to update the code.
right. Yeah, exactly. Right. And it hadn't changed, and they hadn't touched it. And they like
Wow.
the server had like years of uptime with the thing running on
Right, right.
it. We don't like we were used to like doing that, right? Packaging it, giving it to you, and then voila. But it's a different mindset having this delivery as part of your entire design and development process, right? You're thinking, okay, day one, what we're trying to do is deliver and be able to deliver on day two, day three, and then
Right,
in year two, year N, and so you're now as a professional, you want to be doing that as well, right? You don't want to be doing just a demo that you show. You want to be doing a thing
right.
where you click a button, you say you change your dependencies file, you click a button, and then you have a new, provided nothing has like no dependency breaks your stuff,
Hmm.
like you just have a new patched version ready to release.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a huge shift I've seen in my time in software. I remember when I first learned about software development lifecycle, and, we talked about eventually software enters the maintenance phase. And then, that's the longest phase. And, reflecting back, it's like, these aren't really projects because, project implies we build it and then like we're done, we move on. We never move on. We just keep upgrading it and fixing it, and we find new edge cases that nobody knew about because when month end falls on a XYZ, it's a problem, but we didn't think about that because it only happens every 3 years or something,
Right.
and so I think that's been an evolving mindset towards, no, these are products that we continue to invest in, and it isn't just this one and done, and okay, good, I can give you this and now I can walk away. And I think that's part of that mindset of being able to turn that crank and say, yes, there is a CVE, we know it, it's patched, and yes, we are good. I mean, I think back to, God, there was something in like collections a bazillion years ago where we could figure out how many apps it affected. That wasn't hard. But then the answer of, well, when are we going to be upgraded? Yeah, I couldn't tell you that as an architect. I have no idea.
Right. We don't
And
even know
part of
who
the,
owns the app.
no, well, right, you don't even know who owns the app, but then you also run into the problem of, well, wait, our underlying framework and our underlying app server relies on this. Ooh, we don't know when we're going to get an updated version of those. And then you reach out to project teams, and project teams are like, yeah, no, we don't have time for that. It's like, you don't understand. This is a vulnerability. We could potentially be hacked. You need to fix this.
Yeah. Different mindset now. So
I hope so, and I think that people are taking that a lot more seriously. And I do think it's interesting, you working in the security space. We're talking in the pre-show about how I have embedded developers in my grad class, as always, seemingly, and at least one of them works in the medical space. And I've always thought, like, I want nothing to do with anything that gets put in a human's body or can somehow hurt a human being. Like, no, 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 no. I'm much more comfortable with, sure, we updated some numbers in a database, and if we make a mistake, we can just go update those numbers. The idea of doing that kind of work terrifies me. And I think I feel the same way about trying to work on like security software. I remember talking to Rob a little bit out in Vegas at VMworld and or VMware Explorer, excuse me. And I'm like, yeah, I have no idea how you guys do what you do.
yeah, it's a lot.
Thank
It's
you for
evolving
doing it.
fast, right?
Right.
Yeah, and you're building something that is not a packaged product. It's a product for making other products.
Right.
It's very, very. You have to make it secure, and then you have to make it easy to use, because otherwise users like wield it wrong. Can't tell you
Mhm.
how many users I've seen doing like OAuth or SSO completely utterly wrong, or like
Yeah.
it just broken, like
Right.
broken, insecure, because it's too hard. It's too hard to
Right.
understand. And so they're like doing it, they make it work, but it, and so when you're making that a library like this, like Spring Security, how do you make it so that people use it in the right way or in a
Yeah.
secure way?
Right.
Like how do you give them secure defaults that they don't want to
Yes.
break on the first, like, it's just like do you have you ever like bumped into, app armor, or like Linux type securities where you're like, I can't
Mhm.
do anything, I'm just going to turn the whole thing off. Like I go to
Right.
Stack Overflow,
Right.
and the first thing I see is like, turn it off for this. Oh, by the way, that's
Mhm.
not recommended.
Right.
um
Right. Don't do this, but
yeah, right. Because I can help you move forward, but
right.
probably not the best thing. So a hard thing to take into consideration, because
Well,
as an app
and
developer, you cannot focus solely on security. You also have to be
right.
delivering the features, and
Right.
so you cannot be an expert in everything.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and let's be honest, especially when you're first building a product, you generally don't have security enabled because that takes too much time to log in every time. And you have to deal with, well, wait, how do I get test users? And do I have test users that have the right permissions? And how do there's a lot that goes into that. And so it's just easier, just especially early on, well, we're just gonna turn that off. And then, hopefully
Right,
everything works and we turn it back on.
right,
But I always think about too with security. I think this is one of those huge challenges is you have people who are actively trying to break what you are building, and I think back to, when I first started teaching at the University of Minnesota, I was talking with one of the PhDs and he said, oh yeah, no, we are, our computer systems are constantly being probed, and in some cases by students, like they're literally trying to hack into our stuff. And so they're like, yeah, we don't put anything out, like X, Y, and Z anymore because it's just, that it's too much of an open door. And,
right.
so I think about especially the work that you do where it's like, yeah, you got to get it right or
Uh,
else, bad things happen.
yeah, and what's right today changes tomorrow, and it's a constant struggle. How do you get people to also upgrade to keep
Yeah.
up with the practices? And yeah, it's
Yeah.
we're not there yet. As a community of developers, we're not there yet. Getting there, bit by
Yeah,
bit.
it's getting better, right? Because I mean, I think back to some of the earliest projects I worked on, and security was always kind of like that bolted on at the end sort of thing.
Right,
And seemingly every project, we started shifting it more and more and more and more left. And I remember actually having a conversation with our security folks, and he was like, yeah, we are actively trying to get these scans done while you were building code. And this was probably a decade ago. And then so we were bringing in some new tooling so that it was part of your build pipeline where your code was going to have the same scan that we would traditionally do towards the end of the project. And we're going to do that all the time. And
right,
then that way we can tell you right away, hey, you've got a problem here, you need to fix it, as opposed to here's your security audit, and until you fix all these problems you can't go to prod.
right,
Well, let's find that out sooner. And so I think this has long been a recognized problem. We don't want to wait until the end to figure out that we have a gaping hole. Like, no, better to patch as we go.
right. That's an interesting. You're also separating concerns a little bit more, right? You're giving security, and you're giving a responsibility of security to developers, but just a perimeter. They have
Mhm.
some things that they must worry about, and then hopefully, your platform, the thing they rely on to for their stuff to run, this is managed, this is handled by your platform team, your security team, and they can transparently, upgrade the dependencies, upgrade the OS, upgrade the container images, right? What has been done with the build packs, the whole build pack thing, right? Where you have
Mhm.
you're building your Docker images using these build packs, and these build packs, they stack layers of stuff. Your app
Right.
is somewhere, and then it gives people who operate the platform the ability to like remove or like patch this one layer.
Yep.
Like OpenSSL vulnerability is discovered, and then they just patch the OpenSSL, and you as the developers, you don't have to think about it,
Exactly.
because most of the time, like, you don't rely on like bleeding edge OpenSSL features or like bugs
Hope not.
that you right. And so you have some responsibility, but not like the full thing, so that you don't do anything, right? We try to give
Right.
you the scope that makes sense for you.
Right. Yeah, no, I think about that a lot. And as an architect, and frankly, even as a developer, I like the idea of just being able to turn a crank and that problem is fixed for me.
Right.
That's so much simpler. I mean, I remember when I had an instance of WordPress, and it's like, it's not hard to set up, but then it's, oh, there's a new version. Oh, I got to fix this. Oh, I got to fix that.
Right.
And there's just so many little things where it's like, I just don't want to deal with that,
Right.
and maybe it's because I'm getting older and have, I don't know, other things I'd rather do with my time, but I want to focus on something else,
Right.
and I feel that way about like deploying code. I mean, I could certainly stand up a server if I really needed to, but why? Other people
Yeah.
have done it for me, and I can just go deploy,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's running. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
that's so much better. Thank you.
Well, the shift to like newer technologies and the whole 12-factor app, and
Mhm.
now Kubernetes, and where you have a little bit more like, here's some code, and then piping, and it runs.
Mhm.
So you don't have to
Mhm.
think about it too much. You don't have to like, it's not the pet anymore. It's
Right.
I click and there's a new instance and I want to repave. It's fine. I just destroy it and
Right.
like destroy the running, or like deprovision the running server, click a button, and then I have a new one. We do
Mhm.
that for our, we work on the Tanzu application platform. So we have integration testing environments with a full platform deploy. We tear it down every night, and
Right.
then we bring up a new one. It's and the tooling is here for that.
Right.
The processes are here. Here's some state, boom, right? I give you my data, and then
Yeah.
the next morning when I come up online, the first folks right in Europe, 6 a.m. the thing just like starts up, creates a
Mhm.
new instance, and then when I sit on my computer with my coffee in the morning, it's running.
It's running. Yeah. Well, I think in some ways this is a lot like cars. If you go back to when cars first
Yeah,
appeared, you basically needed to be a mechanic in order to
right,
drive a car. And the people who owned them typically were wealthy, and you had a driver because that driver was also the mechanic, and it was a very finicky device. Now I think about the two cars that are sitting in my garage right now. I know where the gas goes in my car. My wife's has got a hybrid, so I know, where that thing plugs in.
hmm,
And I know like where the windshield washer fluid goes, I guess, if I
right,
needed to top that up. But I can't tell you the last time I've even done that, because whenever I go and get an oil change, they just turn that all over. And, cars have kind of become appliances.
right,
They're like a little
right.
black box. And it's like, yeah, I know there's an engine and there's a lever here somewhere that makes the hood open, but I've never checked the oil level in my last two or even three cars that I can think of, and I like that. I mean, that's a feature, not a bug, and so I think we're starting down that path more in software, or at least maybe we're just getting coarser building blocks,
Right.
to put this stuff together. We don't have to concern ourselves with some of those smaller minor things.
So what make and model is Kubernetes in the world of cars? Where are we at?
Boy, that's a good question. I guess it depends a little bit on your perspective, maybe.
Hmm.
This actually came up with my grad students on Friday. Kubernetes is great tech. There's no getting around it. But I feel like we need to remember our customers don't care about Kubernetes. At least they shouldn't.
Mhm.
I get worried, and I've had some customers who wanted to get into the deep implementation details, and that is for me a huge red flag, because those are some of the worst customers to deal with, because they think they know how to do your job better than you do. Like, no, trust me, this may have been the way you did it 15 years ago, because I've had some former IT people that get into the
Right.
business side, and then they're trying to tell me how to do the way they used to do it. It's like, no, 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 we don't have hierarchical databases anymore. Thank you for asking. And so, our job is to get features and functionality to production, and Kubernetes is an awesome way to orchestrate that. But it's not something that our customers are or should be asking for. They're asking for us to solve some business problems. And if Kubernetes gets us there, fantastic. But I still think in most cases, you're better off letting someone else do the care and feeding of your Kubernetes clusters.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. And like not let your developers touch those if they
Mm-mm.
can avoid it.
No. Anytime I hear, the developers are down at kubectl level, I'm like, ooh, that's going to
Yeah.
end badly.
Yeah, yeah. But we're kind of stuck in the middle here. We're not
I know.
at a time where like platforms are everywhere and you don't have to think about that anymore. So hard time to start your developer career now.
But I mean, I think it's transitionary, right? I mean, we go
Right.
through this in our industry seemingly every, I don't know, 5 to 10 years. There's kind of this something new kind of comes along that has a pretty
Hmm.
major shift, and sometimes it it's not as obvious. I think back to when Rails came around and
Oh
we all
yeah.
got very excited about, and I love dynamic languages. I think Ruby is extremely elegant. But what the lasting impact for me, at least, of Rails was convention over configuration.
Right.
And it's just one of those ideas that in retrospect you're like, yeah, why didn't we do it that way? Like, why? I mean, we all structured our projects this way anyway. So
Hmm.
why didn't we just say, if you need to override it, by all means, but if you're just gonna, do what we always do, then yeah, no, we'll just figure that out. And it's like that's very powerful and has a huge impact. We've seen that impact in Spring. We've seen that impact in plenty of other
Oh yeah.
spaces. So I think we'll feel that same way. And I don't know if it's 6 months from now. I don't know if it's 3 years, but we'll look back. We're like, yeah, why didn't we just do it that way all the time?
Probably 3 years. I wouldn't bet for 6 months. This
It's
this
not
is
6 months. No.
that's a big ship to turn around.
Yeah, it is. It is. Well, and some of that I think is companies getting comfortable with that too.
Right.
I was with a client a couple weeks ago, and I was very impressed with the fact that they definitely have this sort of pipeline concept where developers are essentially committing code, and then the code just gets launched, and they don't have to deal with all that. Now, the way they did it was certainly was appropriate before we had things like containers and
Right.
orchestrators and things like that. And so they're a little reluctant to, do we make this shift or not? Because what we have works and it works
Right.
really well, and we know how it works, and we have a lot of control over it. So it'll be interesting for me to see what their evolution looks like, as they start adopting some of these things, and they're in that kick in the tires phase. And so it was really interesting to talk to them about, what their thoughts are, and it is working for them. It's very effective for them. So I try to have that sort of Hippocratic, first do no harm when
Right.
we're talking
Right.
with
Right.
software people. But it'll be interesting to see, what that looks like for them and where they start seeing leverage and seeing, the improvements if they start down that path.
But with your experience, you know that they will change at some
Oh
point,
yeah.
whether they
Yeah.
want it or not. And so
Yes.
maybe now's the time to, start thinking about this change slowly while you're still on top of your current
Right.
processes and you master them and it works for you. How do you transition slowly to this new way of doing things, which maybe it's just going to last 5 years once you get there.
Yeah,
But
maybe.
you get into the habit of moving forward, because then otherwise you have these customers with the huge AS400s, and then their code has been running for 25 years. They've
Yep.
tried modernizing it 3 times already, has never worked.
Hmm.
Um, Maybe it's easier when you start earlier.
Oh, for sure. And I think what typically spurs that change is hiring and attracting and retaining talent.
Right.
And I think that's what this customer certainly recognizes is that they're one of their challenges right now. While their system works incredibly well, it's very effective, very efficient. Bringing someone new in, it's like, okay, so let us teach you this thing that you've never heard of before because we wrote it,
Right.
and again, it works and it works very well. But yeah, you've got the fact that, hey, I can't just put out a job post and say, hey, do you have 5 years experience with our proprietary product? Is you can't,
Right. Right.
and
Right.
I've
Right.
seen that throughout my career. I mean, I've had people who were like, oh yeah, no, what we did is so much better. It's like, well, yeah, and sometimes you didn't have a choice because I mean, I think back to one project where we essentially, I mean, for lack of better words, we built JSPs before JSPs existed
Right. Right.
because JSPs didn't exist.
Right.
And so that was the right solution at the time. The hard part is recognizing when, yeah, we need to get off this hand rolled thing and onto JSPs. So
Right.
you may have a homegrown sort of platform, but you got to recognize when it's time to make that shift. And that's hard because you've got that status quo cost. Everyone thinks it's free. And then there's all the fear, uncertainty, and doubt over the new thing. But there is a cost to staying where you are.
Oh yeah, definitely. I one of my first gigs was building something akin to Spring Boot.
Oh, sure.
More or less when Spring Boot came out, I just didn't know about it.
Right. Right.
So just rebuild something a bit similar, like the starter app for the company, and then in a few years they had to move away from it because it's not sustainable. And who's maintaining the foundation for that? The huge open source ecosystem is a much more stable and nimble foundation to build your stuff on. So
right. Well, plus there's the cost of maintaining your own thing is not free. When you have your own homegrown, whatever it is, you've got anywhere from a couple engineers to dozens of engineers maintaining that. And all of a sudden, if you do the math on that salary and you think, well, what else could these engineers be working on? It adds up quickly. And I've certainly seen that before where companies, if they're honest, they realize, oh yeah, no, we would rather have these people doing other things. I remember having that debate around IDEs. I had a manager once said to me, why would I ever pay for you to get IntelliJ when, Eclipse is free? And my team of Eclipse maintainers, so they had a team of people that were responsible for managing plugins and everything else. And I'm like, you understand that for the cost of the 5 people you have maintaining this free tool, you could outfit like the entire development organization with IntelliJ for the next decade. And then those engineers could go work on something that's far more valuable to the organization.
But is it the same budget line though, right?
It isn't. And that's the problem. Plus you also have the engineers who, my friend Neil has this great quote. He says, meta work's more interesting than work. So in other words, I could add this form field to the XYZ page and map it back to the database. But, that's not really a challenge for someone of my skill set. So what I'm going to do is build a framework for adding fields to the page, because now that's something I can sink my teeth into as an engineer.
Yes.
No, we just need to solve the problems in front of us. And it's hard enough as it is.
Sometimes you can look back and see, where a library would help after the 10 iterations of the same form with the complicated constraints that are just internal to your organization. Maybe there's but there's maturity in recognizing when the time for abstraction is coming.
Yeah. No, and I've seen that instance. I worked on one app where we had a very strong audit requirement, and we had a bunch of entities that all had a very similar pattern to it. And so one of our engineers built a really cool framework that made that far simpler, and so it was very beneficial. It cut down on our work considerably, and it wasn't an overly complicated kind of framework, right? I mean, it wasn't like she didn't have to rewrite Spring kind of a thing. It was much more contained than that, and it did give us leverage, so but again, that's where that experience comes in, and being able to reflect upon, okay, is this a hill I want to die on? Does this add value, add leverage? And then you also have to have that, I guess, vision or maturity to say, well, this was very useful to get us to this point, but now it no longer sparks joy. We thank it and let it go. But that's hard to do too, right? Because you then have that connection of, but I spent 2 years working on this.
Yeah.
I don't want to get rid of it.
You have to calibrate your attachment and your joy when you're doing this work, right?
You do.
Like you can't. I think it's better for your mental health to find joy in the maintenance and adding forms than focusing on the little tidbits of meta work you can have.
Right.
If you find joy in the everyday work and manage to structure it in a way that you find the joy, probably going to be better off.
Well, and to that point, it's we pour a lot of ourselves into our code, and I do not think code gets the credit it deserves for sort of the creative aspect of it. And I recognize it's not poetry, it's not prose, whatever you want to say. I'm not writing the next great American novel, but a lot of ourself is in that code. And I think that's where it can be really hard for us to say, well, I'm going to get rid of this, or I'm going to delete this or refactor this. And it does take, I think, a certain level of maturity to go, yeah, this was as good as I could have done 2 years ago, but I can do it better now. And now I'm going to do it better, and recognize that growth and see it as a positive, and not, I'm going to, fight you at every hill and dale over, changing what I wrote.
Yeah, that's delightful. I find it delightful, like you've invested a lot, you've built it, and now you see the flaws, and now you see what you should have built instead.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, I've learned something. That's great.
Yeah.
Well, maybe now I need the approval to do the right thing, but in due time,
Yeah. And that can be hard. There's no getting around it. But I definitely recognize, as I've done this longer, that that's a feature, not a
Right.
bug. When
Yeah,
you recognize how something could be improved, and reflecting upon those mistakes that you made on previous projects. We've all done it. We've all done something we're not proud of. We didn't know it at the time, but we know more now than we did then. And that's a good thing, but so changing gears ever so slightly, do you have any advice for people who are like, God, I'd really like to get involved with open source, but I don't even know where to begin. I'm not an expert on this. There's this little thing that bothers me, or there's this thing I'd like to do. And, certainly I've talked with Glenn about this. I know he does a presentation on sort of getting involved with open source.
Right.
And, what are your thoughts and reflections on that?
So, first, it's much easier to get in on a very small project.
Yeah.
Or something that's getting started, where like getting in, if you want to start contributing to Spring Framework, you need some depth to that.
You need some patience.
Yes, a lot of patience. And you need experience using it before going there. But like, if your library is like that first contribution that took me 6 months, the library was 120, 150 lines of code, something like that.
That's it.
Yeah, that's
it.
So it was a thing in JavaScript that allowed you to write aliases for imports. So instead of like doing, require A, B, C, D, C nested.js, you could do like define aliases for at nested or something like that.
Okay.
Which was not built into Node. I don't think it's built into Node yet.
Sure.
We have ESM modules now, and if you're doing TypeScript, it exists in TypeScript, but that was it, right? And so they had defaults for where to find your aliases, and it worked well in certain situations, but it didn't work well at the time. It was in Cloud Foundry or in Heroku, like platform like this, which, and so getting in on that, it's easy because you can read all of the code and understand it. It has no dependencies, and it has little things you can touch, you can experiment with, right? You can do it. And so I'm doing a presentation in a few weeks, and I'm writing my slides using a program called Slides. And so it's like a terminal-based slide thing, right? And so you can customize a few things, the colors, but that's about it. And I'm like, I would like to customize the colors of the footer, right?
Sure.
Because it's not built in, but like diving into that code, it's just a few classes. It's a few classes of Go. I don't write Go most of the day. I can find my way around it. Like I can go and like just I have a custom build now, so I can have my colors in my footer.
Nice.
I intend to I think there's an issue that describes this, and they say, oh, you can change this bit of code, and then you have the colors you want. So what I did instead is I read configuration to load the code dynamically, and so I intend to turn that into a PR. I make it for me first, and it's much easier for me to get into that. For getting into a bigger project, and a more complicated one, I think sometimes you have events that do that. In Europe, like I don't know if you do this in the US. In Europe, we have hacker gardens where we would go and contribute. Try and reach out to the maintainers. If you have a specific problem and you can't really get into it because you want to contribute, but you don't know what to contribute about. Right? You kind of have to have a thread that you need to pull on to put the code there, right? So
Right.
so if you want to get into a bigger project, you have to get very familiar with it. Conferences are a good way to, give a talk about this. You're a
Yeah.
user of it, and so go give a talk, like explain to us how it works, and then you'll discover more things, and maybe you'll have your finger on that one specific use case that you want to change. And
Hmm.
then if you have a problem issue, you put an issue in GitHub, and then you express interest in contributing a PR. And depending on the projects, this is usually well received, and they will
Yeah.
guide you and so on. So definitely start with a need, something
Yes.
that would benefit you,
Right.
because you'll have the context on why this is needed and where it should
Hmm.
fit.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think too that the idea of giving a talk on something is a very powerful way of learning it, exploring it, and also shows that you aren't just here to sort of lob bombs, or why didn't you guys fix this problem, fix this right away, I
Right.
why don't you know how important I am, that it's like, no, I'm part of this community and I'm trying to make it better, not just for myself but for others as well. And I think there's this misunderstanding in a lot of cases that, well, if you aren't giving a graduate level presentation on this thing, it's not valuable. That's rarely the case. In fact, I
Right.
think some of the most powerful and important presentations are the getting started with,
Oh yeah.
because we're constantly minting new computer science people, and they don't
Yeah.
have 15 years of experience with Spring or with Docker or any of
So
these things.
last year I was at DevOps as well, and I did a 3-hour format. They call it University on
Hmm.
not getting started, but like Spring Security Demystified. I think it's in the
Yeah,
top 3 or top 5 most watched videos, and it's a 3-hour
that's
presentation
awesome.
because it's a complicated things. People want to
Yeah,
understand, want to get in on it, and
yeah,
and and if you yourself want to improve on stuff like that, giving a talk it's a booster. It's incredible, and
by far.
you don't have to go and submit to this very intimidating conference. You can do it at your local user group.
Yes,
They're
yes,
looking for people to present,
yeah.
and you'll get feedback. You got friendly feedback from people who are happy to welcome you
Hmm.
into that community.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen a user group. They're like, "Oh no, we're booked up for the next 3 years solid. We got nothing. We're not interested."
Yeah.
I don't think I've seen that very often. Certainly not these days. So yeah, it's a good point. It doesn't always have to be, "Hey, let's pitch DevOps Belgium," the original, and then
Right, right,
see
right.
what kind of trouble that gets us into. There are smaller regional things as well, and there's a lot of opportunities. I think we're pretty constantly looking for those voices, and
Oh yeah.
I would encourage people to throw their hat in the ring. And I know how intimidating it can be, to get up in front of an audience, but it's one of the best ways to learn, and
Right. Like
it's one of the best ways to grow in
this
your career.
right, this being intimidated and like preparing to know as much as you can before going on stage, like this
Hmm.
fear, or like this
Hmm.
the stress is a good, it's a good drive to make
Yeah.
you learn things.
Yeah. Yeah. That's one of my favorite ways of, I want to learn about this thing. Oh, I'm going to volunteer to give a presentation about this thing. And then, oh, I better learn this thing.
You
See, now,
proved it.
now, right now, Venkat does the opposite. Venkat's like, I want to learn about this. I'm going to write the book about this. And it's like, come on, Venkat, you're making the rest of us look bad, buddy. It's not nearly as easy as he makes it look.
No.
So I've mentioned this a couple of times, but I do some adjunct work at the University of Minnesota. You also do some teaching. How did you get into teaching, and what are your sort of thoughts, feelings about that aspect of your career?
So it was a few years back, 5 years now. I I I graduated from an engineering school in France called the School of Mines, which was
Oh,
about it was founded in, I think, 1783 or something like that. When we had actual mines in France, and they were a big
yeah,
deal, right? So
yeah,
they needed engineers to like
right,
actually dig and do the thing right. We don't do mines that much anymore. There are a few people who do,
sure,
geology and underground stuff, because there's this thing called oil, and
yeah,
right. Um, but I did I majored there, and my minor was computer science, and I had
Yeah.
a lot of fun doing that. And after a while, they had some adjuncts who left the program, and they were looking for people. And since I stayed close to the university, my teacher at the time just sent me an email and said, "Hey, we have slots. Are you open to
Are
this?"
you
And
interested? Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And I was like, "Oh yeah, sure, let's go." I had not realized how much work it is
Yeah.
before doing that.
Yeah.
It's a very
Yeah. They don't tell you
also.
that for a reason.
Oh yeah, right. And the pay is per hour is okay if you're not counting like the three times the amount of work you're doing
Yes.
outside.
Yes. 1,000%. It's just like writing a book. It's one of those things where
Yeah,
you do
yeah,
not
yeah.
do it to get rich.
No,
This is not Stephen King action. Sorry.
no, definitely not. But it compounds over time. You have your base
Yeah.
material that you work on in the
Yeah.
first
It
few
helps.
years, and it helps after that. Um, but yeah, it was a great. I like teaching. I think that
Hmm.
was always something that I liked when I was in university. I would um, do a paid, I don't know how you call that, but for high school students or uh, first year students at university, I would do private lessons in
Sure.
math
Like
or
tutoring
physics.
kind of stuff.
Right, exactly, right.
Yeah.
And then like pairing was teaching as well at labs.
Yeah.
Uh,
100%.
and the conference thing is teaching as well. And so
Yep.
got attracted to this as well. I think I like we have this thing. There's this philosopher, I guess, of or like this big thinker of education in France, who thought about this concept of the teaching triangle. So you
Uh-huh.
have three elements in a teaching relationship. You have the student, you have the teacher, the professor, the person who has the knowledge, and you have the knowledge. And there
Hmm.
exists a relationship between each of these couples in your triangle, if you will.
Yeah.
And good teaching happens when you manage to balance all these relationships, right? When you're not doing
Hmm.
this just one thing. So if you're
Right.
not just doing, if you're doing only teacher knowledge, then it's just you, the teacher, having fun, and then the rest of the class
Hmm.
gets disengaged, right?
Hmm.
And so in this teaching, I have fun with the knowledge, and I have to
Yeah.
explore before I go and give a presentation to my students, before I give a class, before I hand out assignments. I have to know the big picture around it
Right.
and all the little details, so I can extract the thing of the knowledge that I think is most interesting for students. And
Hmm.
then I like the relationship with students, like the mentoring part.
Yeah.
And then I like when the students get to interact with the knowledge themselves. So I teach
Hmm.
Python, HTML, JavaScript, CS 101, CS 102 level type of thing. And like seeing them interact with the knowledge and like seeing them,
Yeah.
you know, seeing the moment when it clicks in their head
Yeah.
is
Light
absolutely
bulbs are
delightful.
fun.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I had a lot of fun having my own light bulbs in my time, and I
Yeah.
still do. And
Yeah.
so, being a vessel, bringing those light bulbs to students is
Right.
great.
Well, I know in my first session, I always sort of talk about my teaching philosophy as part of that. And, there's Isaac Newton quote I ran into a long time ago and paraphrase. It's basically, I don't know what I appear to the world, but I'm basically just someone walking along the shore, pointing out smoother pebbles and prettier shells. And I feel like that's a lot of what I'm trying to do with my students is just sort of say like, hey, look at this interesting thing. What do you think about that? And then just seeing where it goes. And I love that interaction and the back and forth. And it's certainly for a long time has been my favorite part of my week. And I actually had a student this last session who asked me, so why do you teach in this program? And it wasn't in any kind of accusatory way. It was just general curiosity. And I had a lot of fun answering that question because it's like, well, I went through this program. And so, I feel a little bit of an obligation to sort of reach my hand down and help, the next generation, so to speak, make this ascension as well. But it's just a lot of fun, and part of what it does for me is I get an exposure to so many different types of software, and the classic example for me is embedded software. I've never written embedded software. and yet at least not in anger, and yet I've had, I think pretty much every cohort, I've had at least one student who works in embedded. And it's such an interesting set of constraints that I've never really had to deal with professionally. And that's very beneficial to me because then I go, oh, yeah, that's a context I never had to think about. Let me ponder what those implications are. And it allows me that freedom to explore some spaces that I would frankly be pretty ignorant of if I didn't have that exposure.
Well, that's more grad level courses, right? Like
Yes.
people
Yes.
with background and
I get to work with full-time working adult grad students.
right.
It's pretty ideal because I almost, well, the last couple of cohorts have been excellent, but I've traditionally had at least one student that was a little challenging in terms of doing the work. But by and large, if you're in this program, you are serious and you're dedicated. And so, the thing I always tell them at the beginning of the semester is, don't give me a reason to give anything other than an A, because you're an adult and you know what you need to do. Yeah. I'll treat you like an adult if until you give me a reason not to. And if you need an extra week, just ask. I'm not, I don't have any burning desire to, to make this challenge, to make this harder than it has to be. And, I also appreciate that they are full-time working adults. The majority of them have families and hobbies and friends. And it's like, if something comes up at work and you can't get to it, great. Just let me know. And, we'll give you a couple days or a week if you need it.
I have the opposite. My students are in their 20s, early 20s, like 20, 21.
Okay.
So you have to give them the
that could be a little more
motivation
challenging.
It's a different thing. It's like in a class we have, 18, 20 students. There's always one or two who are like very into it, love it. You could give them a book and they would just learn in the same way.
Yep.
There's one or two, there's no saving grace for them. They just don't want to be there. And it's fine. It's less work for me.
Yeah.
But then the challenge is the rest. Like, how do you get them interested, and how do you expose enough that they are like they're not scared about like this computer thing. They're at the state where like the first thing is we make them code a little game of Snake in Python. Which we give little bits and then they have to assemble stuff and make it work. And one of the instructions is like, take this code, put it in a file and run it. And the questions we sometimes get are like, what do you mean put it in a file? File. Yeah.
Put it in a file.
Right?
Oh, okay.
Wow.
All right.
Well, there's really a concept of file in your device anymore.
That's a great point.
And so if you're just a user, and if you've been using, I don't know, Google Docs and your phone, and so getting those folks to be not discouraged by the end of the semester is the challenge in that one. But it's great. It's great fun. It requires investment, but it's great fun.
That's awesome.
And they have to give in their assignments, otherwise, they're lost. They won't do it if they don't being regular week over week. Helps a lot.
Oh, for sure. That comment, like they're not used to dealing with files. It reminds me, somebody showed a 3.5-inch floppy to a younger person, and someone looked at it and said, "Wow, somebody 3D printed the save icon." That's exactly. And I think that's going to be an interesting thing to see throughout my career is some of those things that I've just taken for granted that they don't even have a concept of that. I think save is one of those. I'm so programmed in my head to hit Command S
all the time. Yeah.
And then I get into something that doesn't need that, and it's like, oh, that's right, that doesn't do anything, or now I'm trying to save this HTML file. Like, no, I'm just my brain thinks I need to do this. It's because it's so hardwired. I had enough bad experiences.
As a programmer now, you have to have something that hooks into this shortcut and displays a pop-up, even if it doesn't do anything. It's saved already, but it gives you feedback that you click. It's fine.
Exactly. Yep. Here's your pellet.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Daniel, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you for taking some time out of your evening. I really appreciate it. This has been a blast. And I don't know if you noticed this, but the the little house you made out of the socks at
Oh
our
yeah,
booth.
yeah, yeah.
It stayed up. It was up the next day when I went back
Oh,
over
did
there.
it?
So
Oh
it did.
wow.
It did. Somebody, I think, had taken part of the top off, but it was still in
Ah,
place. So
yes.
you did an excellent job putting together the the house of socks.
The house of the spring socks. I don't know if it renders well on the screen like this. Spring socks.
That's right. It's all
If
about the spring socks.
See how stable spring is? Haha.
Right. Even
Did you know
socks can
did
be.
you know that you can make a house of socks? Now you
That's
can.
right. That's right. Well, next week, Mark Pollock's going to join me. We're going to chat probably
Amazing.
about AI, would be my guess. I think there's a pretty strong likelihood we'll get into that space. So I'm intrigued by that. And, that's something that keeps, unsurprisingly, making its way into our universe for better or worse. So I guess we'll see what that all looks like. But Daniel, thank you again. I know you've got DevOps Belgium coming up. Do you want to talk a bit about what you're going to be discussing there in October?
So DevOps Belgium is going to be about OAuth and OpenID and
Oh,
like live coding it from scratch.
okay.
You've seen it, you see a lot of presentation with diagrams of like 15 steps of what happens. I decided to do it in code, and we'll see how it goes.
Nice. Outstanding. Well, I wish you luck at that presentation.
And come and say hi if you're there, right? Like if you have Spring Security questions, OAuth questions, um, if you have any question, if you want to talk about the weather, delighted to chat.
Yeah, see that's what I miss so much about the in-person events is this is a perfect opportunity to come up and chat with people
Oh
and
yeah,
ask a specific question or just, hey, how you doing? I want to introduce myself. I think that's another thing if folks are interested in how do I contribute, how do I give back, how do I
right.
be a more active part of this community, go to these events and just come say hi. I think I've said this repeatedly, but one of the things that I appreciate so much about the Spring community is how welcoming it is to new people. That is not universal, sadly, in software.
Right,
I
right,
have
right.
yet to run into an individual in the Spring space that isn't extremely generous and giving. And I talked to Michael about this actually at the team dinner, and I said, hey man, I've said this to you on Slack. I want to say it again to your face. I mean, it's amazing to me, this collection of engineers and just how kind and generous and giving they are. I mean, I spent like 3 hours in Atlanta pairing with Glenn on my
Right,
little dinky app.
right,
Glenn didn't need
right,
to do
right,
that,
right, right,
and yet that's not unique
right.
in this space. And it's something I certainly appreciate as someone who's trying to learn these things, but I think it's a testament to the people and it's a testament to the team, that leads it as well.
Definitely. If you find me on the internet, there's not many people like me or with that name. Feel free to reach out. After conferences, I usually get one or two emails with like very pointed questions on like, my user logs in using OpenID, but their authorities are stored in LDAP. How do I make that happen? And I don't guarantee that I'll give you an answer within the week, but
Right.
I'll take
Right.
the time.
Right.
And usually it's a good opportunity for me to learn about some of the corner cases I had never thought of.
Yeah. Yeah. I know Dan did some of that too with some he was running into a security where he's like, wait, there's got to be a better way to do this.
Right, right. Yeah.
So well, thank you again, my friend. I really appreciate your time. Have a good rest of your evening and have a great week. And
You
I hope
too.
that our paths cross physically again in the near future, that it
Yes.
isn't another year before we're in the same
Yeah,
physical
hopefully.
space.
But now you have to fly over. I'm staying
That's
here.
fine by me. I love coming to Europe, especially. I mean, it's been a long time since I've been to Paris. That was a pre-pandemic thing for me, but
Right,
I
right.
used to get over there at least once or twice a year, and I'm very, I guess, lucky to know some very fun places in a lot of these cities, and I miss not getting over to them on a regular basis. So fingers crossed. I actually have a very fun picture of my kid. My son and wife came with me once when I was over for, I think it was Spring One Paris or Spring One Tour Paris, and he's wearing like a little beret and sunglasses,
Oui,
and he
very
even asked us at one
français.
point, pretty
Very,
much.
very
I mean,
français.
and he was kind of looking at us at one point. And he's like, "Could we move to like France? Is that like a possibility?" And so my wife looked it up, and I mean, it's feasible, at
Right.
least, from a financial standpoint. The language barrier would take me a little while to overcome. Whenever I'm in France, I know just enough Spanish where my Spanish starts kicking in.
Oh yes.
But then I'm starting to try to like speak Spanish instead of, I mean, I have like 7 words of French, and
Yeah.
that doesn't go over well.
Yeah.
But
Maybe
do?
the English is like, it's actually getting better. Maybe people now understand you a little bit more than they used to.
I'm fairly confident in many cases folks understood it. They just didn't want to acknowledge it. Like, no,
No.
I'm just not
No,
going to
no.
interact with you. No, you silly American tourist. Go away.
The
You know,
Parisian experience for you. Oui.
exactly. You're going to get the full Paris experience, and you're going to like it. You know. But no, I have a lot of fun memories of Paris, and I'm hopefully, you know, sometime in 24 they'll let us come back.
Fingers crossed.
Awesome. Thank you, my friend. Appreciate it.
All right. Have a good one.
Cheers.